Kia ora and welcome. When it comes to food safety within a food processing environment like a production kitchen, we've generally speaking got 4 critical control points. These are also referred to as your process control points. So the first critical control point is when the food is delivered, when it comes in your back door. In your case, it could come through from the front door. But the first thing we do when food is delivered is we take a temperature, particularly for any perishable food, things like meat, fish, chicken, milk, etc. When the delivery happens at the back door, we take a temperature. So that's your first critical control point. Once the food is delivered, we put it away into a chiller or refrigerator or freezer. This is your second critical control point. So it's really important to understand that we check our chillers once every day at a minimum. If you are working in a high risk environment like a hospital kitchen, for example, or a supermarket, for example, we might check the temperatures at least once every 8 hours or 3 times a day. So that's your second critical control point. If the food coming in is not being kept in the fridge or freezer and we put it into a pantry, it's really important that the pantry is being kept clean. Any food that you are taking out of a packet, you are putting into a bin or container. All bins and containers need to be clean, well labeled, as you can see, and you've got good pest control around your storage area. You're thinking about insects, you're thinking about things like rats and mice, and your pest control program is a supporting program. So if you've got a commercial company coming in to do pest control, it's really important that you're keeping the records of each of those visits. If you don't have a commercial company coming in to do pest control, then it's expected, if you're operating out of a home kitchen, for example, that you organize for your own pest control. And it's very important that you are keeping records to show a verifier or food safety auditor that you are complying and monitoring for pest control. But to summarize, storage is your second critical control point. Your third critical control point is when you are cooking food. So when we're cooking food, it's really important that we are cooking. We are heat treating the food, so you're going all the way to at least 80 degrees centigrade for at least 15 seconds. If you are joining me and watching this video from America, for example, and you're using Fahrenheit, you're looking at about 176 degrees Fahrenheit. Really important. This is a higher standard, by the way, than a regulatory standard or what might be required by law. So it factors in a higher safety margin. If you are reheating food, for example, the expectation is you're taking it to at least 85 degrees for at least 15 seconds. In Fahrenheit, that's about 181.4 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 15 seconds. Once you finish cooking the food, it's really important that you are obviously cooling down the food. Cooling is another area where things can go wrong. So you need to maintain a cooling down temperature record. It's really important that you take the food out of the oven or the stove. You put it into shallow trays, for example. You make sure that the steam stops, and then as quickly as possible you take it and put it away into a chiller or a freezer. Really important that you are documenting this, because your verifier or your food safety auditor might ask you questions around cooling down food. The general theory about cooling down food is you need to take it from hot, as in either oven or boiling temperature, all the way to 21 degrees within 2 hours, and from 21 degrees to 4 degrees centigrade within 2 hours. If you are operating in a small production kitchen like a cafe or restaurant or home kitchen, you should try to avoid keeping food out for longer than about an hour. If perishable food is being kept out for longer than 2 hours, you should not consume the food. But that's your third critical control point. These are obviously related to heat, temperature, and time combinations. If you're working in a sushi shop, your critical control point, for example, with rice is a pH check of the rice. You're adding vinegar to the rice and you're checking the pH of the rice is less than 4.2 pH. So that's an example of another critical control point. If you're doing high pressure processing, for example, and you're trying to minimize the risk of listeria growing in food, your critical control point is above 600 MAP, and essentially you're taking it to at least 20 degrees centigrade for at least 2 minutes. So that's an example of a critical limit and a critical control point around the processing. It's really important to understand when you are chilling food down and when you're freezing food, bacteria don't actually die. The only time you can kill bacteria is during the cooking process, or if you're changing the pH of the rice, for example, or if you're exposing the food to high pressure, for example. The fourth critical control point might apply to some kitchens. If, for example, you are cooking the food and then packaging the food or presenting it to the customer either in a chiller or in a hot holding cabinet. If you are hot holding the food for 2 hours or more, you need to put the food into a pie warmer or a bain-marie, for example, and you're taking the food to at least 70 degrees centigrade or 158 degrees Fahrenheit. That's really important. And you are checking the temperature of your hot holding, for example, every 2 hours. If, for example, you take the food out of the oven at 8 o'clock and you put the pies into the pie warmer at 8 o'clock, you will check the pie warmer at 10 o'clock. So that's 2 hours from the time you put it in. And then again, good practice is to do a second check on the 4-hour mark. At 4 hours, it's generally recommended that we obviously dispose of the food. There are companies that might keep food or pies in a pie warmer for longer than 4 hours, but generally speaking, good practice in a hospital or aged care kitchen, for example, you don't want to exceed the 4-hour mark. And those are the 4 critical control points in a kitchen. So to quickly recap the process or critical control points: when the food comes in at the back door, we do a temperature check for particularly perishable food. We are concerned obviously of storage. The second control point is checking that the storage systems are working, doing a refrigerator and freezer check at least once a day at a minimum. The third critical control point is your cooking or pH check, for example, or high pressure check, for example. Generally speaking, in a production kitchen like a cafe or restaurant, it's cooking. And your fourth critical control point is obviously storage after the cooking process, especially if you're storing food for 2 hours or more. If, for example, you're doing baked type goods like biscuits or cookies, for example, you do not require to have all these 4 critical control points. You're thinking about when the honey or the biscuits is being delivered at the back door. And then, of course, you don't have to keep a cooking temperature because we're quite aware of the temperature you need to cook at to get color on a cake or brownie. And finally, when you are taking the brownie or the cookies out of the oven, you'll have a traceability record perhaps. And that could be a control point for your kitchen. And that is the 4 process or 4 critical control points of your kitchen or food production area.